Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. Whether large or small, I'm sure we can all agree that coincidences happen all the time. And while by definition these events are remarkable and usually strange, we'd argue that there is something creepier altogether when coincidences happen in the world of true crime. Given the subject matter, it's not hard to understand why. And knowing that the stories are all too real only adds to that chilling sense of uneasiness we feel when hearing about these eerie events. Today, we wanted to take a look at two examples of such cases, stories with spine-tingling coincidences that we certainly found creepy. Just a heads up, we'll be dedicating an entire video to each one of these stories, so make sure to check out the description below for the link to today's second case. If you enjoy our videos, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. With that out of the way, here is part 1 of 2 crime stories with creepy coincidences. At around midnight on June 22nd, 1991, 41-year-old Charles Holden was in the home stretch of his usual work night routine. He had just finished working the second shift at his factory job at the DuPont company and was now heading home to his trailer, located a few miles east of the small city of Harrington, Delaware. Like most nights, Charles decided to stop at the Hardee's drive-in for some fast food on the way home. The restaurant was conveniently located at the intersection of US Highway 13 and Delaware Highway 14, and from there, it was only a short drive to his trailer. Upon arriving at Hardee's, Charles placed his usual order of a coffee and hamburger and waited in his truck. He had just received his food and was getting ready to leave when he was approached by a stranger. The man was in his late 20s or early 30s, was slim, and appeared to be about 5 feet 8 inches tall, and was wearing glasses with large dark frames. His appearance at the side of Charles's truck was not a total surprise, as Charles had already seen the man go up to a couple of other people at the restaurant, asking them a couple of questions before moving on. It was obvious that he was a hitchhiker. When the stranger got to Charles's truck, he immediately asked him for a favor. Would it be possible for Charles to give him a ride to Milford Memorial Hospital in the next town over? He said that he was in the midst of a family emergency. His sister had just had a baby, and he had no way of getting there. At first, Charles told the man that he was sorry, but he couldn't do it. Sure, Milford wasn't that far away, but it was already late and he was headed home, and the trip would take him well past where he needed to be. However, possibly sensing the man's desperation and wanting to be a good Samaritan, Charles decided to give the stranger a different option. He said that he could ride with him for a short distance in the direction of Milford, but that he would drop him off once he was no longer headed that way. The man agreed and hopped into Charles's truck, and they began to head east down Delaware Highway 14. About 3 miles down the highway, Charles came to a stop outside of a local mechanics business called Blake's Garage. He was now at the intersection of Killen Pond Road, where he needed to make his turnoff to head the rest of the way to his trailer, though Charles did not share this information with the man. Instead, Charles directed the man to a nearby payphone, suggesting that maybe here he could arrange for a ride the rest of the way. After all, he was now a good chunk of the distance to the hospital. Though the stranger had acted relatively normal up until this point, upon hearing that Charles could take him no further, he immediately snapped. First, he got angry and started to argue with him, and when that didn't work, he pulled out a screwdriver and began to attack. Fearing for his life, Charles jumped out of the truck with his keys in hand and tried to make a run for help, but the stranger was too fast for him and quickly caught up. When he did, Charles managed to calm him down by saying that he would drive him wherever he wanted to go. The men walked back to the truck, but before the stranger could get in on the passenger's side, Charles accelerated away as fast as he could, leaving the enraged man in the middle of the street, still outside of the garage. While Charles was relieved to have survived the harrowing ordeal, he quickly realized that he couldn't now simply make the turnoff for his home. Though his trailer was located roughly a half-mile down Killen Pond Road and was situated on a more than 160-acre plot of land on the family farm, he didn't want to risk being followed. He decided that instead of immediately heading home, he would drive around for a while and maybe try and take a different route there. He also needed a little bit of time to shake off what had happened. He was bruised on the face from the fight with the stranger, and part of his arm had been burned when he spilled his coffee in surprise at the attack. After feeling like he had calmed down a short time later, Charles finally made his way to his trailer. However, the calm wouldn't last long. Chillingly, when he pulled up, he saw a shadowy figure on the lawn, peering right into his windows. Thoroughly freaked out by this point, Charles immediately fled in his truck, driving back into Harrington to use a payphone to call 911 at 1:19 a.m. Though the prowler call was apparently a low priority for local authorities, eventually police showed up and helped Charles to check his trailer. Surprisingly, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary, and for a moment, it perhaps seemed like the nightmare might be over. However, there was one more place Charles wanted to check before he sent the police on their way. He wondered if they could check on his 70-year-old mother, Dorothy Donovan, who lived in a 2-story farmhouse next door. Disturbingly, when Charles and the police got to Dorothy's home, they noticed that the back door showed signs of a break-in. The glass in one of the door's windows had been broken, seemingly allowing someone to reach in and open it from the inside. When they entered the house, their calls for Dorothy also went unanswered. They soon discovered why. The elderly woman had been stabbed more than a dozen times and was now lying dead in her bed. At first, police turned their attention to Charles. After all, his only explanation for the night's events had to do with a mysterious violent hitchhiker, who by Charles's own admission had been more than a half a mile from his mother's house when he had made his supposed escape. Charles couldn't even say for sure that this was the person that he had seen prowling around his house when he drove back earlier that morning, as he had fled in terror before he could get a good look. There was also the fact that nothing appeared to have been stolen from Dorothy's house, and the home had not been ransacked. If robbery wasn't the motive, police theorized that the crime was likely personal in nature. Further investigation revealed that Dorothy had likely been dead for an hour or two before they had discovered her body, between the time that Charles claimed to have had the encounter with the hitchhiker and when he had placed his call to police. While it seemed possible to investigators that Charles could have committed the crime during this time and then taken steps to cover it up, it seemed less likely that an unknown attacker could have somehow found his mother's house and carried out a frenzied attack, especially since there were plenty of other homes in the surrounding area. Even Charles had trouble rationalizing the situation. Though he concluded that the killer must have been the same man who attacked him, he would later tell the media, quote, "I can't figure out how he got there so fast." Unbelievably though, as authorities began to dig deeper, they soon found compelling evidence that Charles was telling the truth. Witnesses who were at the Hardys around the same time that night also remembered seeing a hitchhiker that matched the description Charles gave to police. A man who passed the garage where Charles was attacked also told investigators that he saw the fight between him and the strange hitchhiker taking place. However, the most important piece of exculpatory evidence came in the form of a bloody palm print left on the banister of the stairs leading up to the second floor of Dorothy's house. The print wasn't a match to Charles, nor was other DNA found at the crime scene. Though Charles was now definitively ruled out as a suspect, the information came as little solace to him or the rest of his family. Instead, they were simply left with more questions, as well as the guilt of wondering whether there was more that they could have done to prevent Dorothy's death. The 70-year-old had lived alone in her 2-story farmhouse since the death of her second husband in 1987. It was the home where Charles and his 2 sisters had spent a majority of their childhoods. It had always felt safe, like nothing bad could ever happen there. Aside from this, Dorothy had always been outgoing and independent, the kind of person who cared for others instead of needing to be cared for herself. Despite her advanced age, she had retained these qualities. She loved to spend time working in her garden and was a familiar face at her church and the local senior center. She was close with all of her children and 7 grandchildren, and had no enemies to speak of. The idea that she could have died in such a horrific way was unthinkable to her friends and family. Though a sketch of the mysterious hitchhiker was quickly created and circulated based on the numerous witness accounts given to police, it did not generate the tips that investigators had hoped for. Based on the little they knew about the suspect, they feared that he was an opportunistic criminal who was simply passing through the area at the time, and as weeks began to pass with no new information, this fear seemed validated. Leads eventually dried up altogether, until finally, the case went cold. In late 1994, the show Unsolved Mysteries announced that they would be doing a segment about Dorothy's case. The segment ultimately aired in May of 1995, and at the time, showrunners told local media in interviews that they were optimistic that the case could be solved. As a side note, I remember watching reruns of this episode as a kid, and still remember Dorothy and Charles's story as one of the ones that most frightened me. Unfortunately, despite the high hopes for the Unsolved Mysteries segment, it failed to uncover substantial new information about the unknown hitchhiker. At the beginning of 2001, close to the 10-year anniversary of Dorothy's murder, the media reported that authorities were beginning to actively reinvestigate the case, and that they were also starting to consider alternative theories of the case. This new direction was largely driven by a couple of profilers from the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, who looked at the investigation and were convinced that the unknown hitchhiker theory was simply a red herring. Many of the arguments for this were similar to those police initially considered when their investigation had briefly focused on Charles. In particular, they zeroed in on the lack of stolen items from Dorothy's house and the brutality of her murder. They theorized that in order not to have disturbed any items in her home during the middle of the night, the culprit likely would have had to have possessed prior knowledge about the layout of her home, and they suggested that the nature of her death showed that the crime was personal. In short, though Charles had been ruled out, Dorothy had likely still been killed by someone she knew. Though this theory would eventually be proven incorrect, the new investigation would still turn out to be extremely worthwhile, when DNA evidence would finally reveal the answers that police had been searching for. As part of the 2001 investigation, blood samples from the 1991 crime scene were sent to the FBI for analysis. Eventually, these made their way to the State Medical Examiner's Office in Wilmington and were submitted to the National CODIS DNA database. In November of 2005, more than 14 years after Dorothy was murdered, investigators received news that blew the case wide open. A DNA match had been found in the database to a 41-year-old Maryland man named Gilbert E. Cannon. Cannon was a convicted felon with a criminal history dating back to 1981, whose rap sheet included robbery, theft, escape after conviction, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, burglary, and assault. His most recent conviction for robbery had landed him in prison for 7 years, and he had been required to provide a DNA sample upon his release in September of 2004. This was how the DNA match had been made. Though Cannon's whereabouts were unknown at the time the match was found, as he had fled while on parole, by January of 2006, police were able to track him down and place him under arrest. More DNA tests confirmed Cannon's connection to the crime scene, and his palm print was found to be a match to the one that had been left on Dorothy's banister. Following Cannon's arrest, the full truth about the crime finally came out. As hard as it was for many people to believe, Cannon really was both the same man behind Dorothy's killing and the person that Charles had given a ride to on that June night back in 1991. Cannon eventually confessed to police that he had been high on drugs at the time, and that after he attacked Charles, he began to walk down the road, looking for a place to sleep. By pure coincidence, he headed in the direction of Dorothy's house, passing several others along the way. He did not know either her or Charles, and the only reason he chose Dorothy's house to break into was that it was the first house he saw where all of the lights appeared to be off. He said that he killed her to stop her from being able to identify him. In April of 2007, Cannon accepted a plea bargain in connection with the case, agreeing to plead guilty to first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Though their mother's killer was now behind bars, sadly, reports from the time state that the ordeal caused a rift between Charles and his two sisters. Even after almost 16 years, it appeared that they couldn't understand why he had chosen to give Cannon a ride that fateful night. They gave statements to the media at the time, saying that they were attempting to mend their relationship, though unfortunately, it's unclear whether the distance between them ever fully healed. Sadly, Charles's youngest sister Diana passed away in August of 2020, at the age of just 66 years old. Do you know of any other cases like this that you think we should check out? Tell us about them in the comments section below. As always, if you enjoyed our video, don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Zone for more true crime content like this, making sure to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. Thank you for watching.